Well, hello! Today we're going to take a look at what's inside this exciting box from Runcam. But just before we get into it, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, don't forget to subscribe, and click on that little bell icon to find out when I'm uploading stuff. Anyway, what's in the box? Excitingly, it is the new Runcam 5, which you can't see because it's a black camera in some black surround. But let's get it out of the box and we can see what else is in it. This is the camera itself. It's got a little lens protector here, let's just get that off. And you know, if you haven't been living under a rock lately, you would know that the GoPro Session is, or has been discontinued, and everybody is looking for what's next for it. And this looks fairly much identical, which is interesting because there was the Runcam 3 that came out a while back and it was withdrawn from sale, we think because it infringed on GoPro's copyright or whatever towards having this particular dimensions. I actually had a quick search through the patents, and GoPro have put loads and loads out there, most famously of course the Super View, the specific type of stretching it does in ratio, which no one else is allowed to copy within the camera. But there was also a patent where it patented, and this has been accepted, basically having a camera in the form factor of a box shape, which seems a bit vague to me. In some ways I understand patents, in other ways I'm quite against them. When someone says, okay, I've designed a camera that's in the shape of a box, it seems like a bit too much. It seems like that's going to hurt innovations from other people coming up, because of course big companies use patents just to trade with each other, so they don't sue each other, and of course the little guy that's trying to develop something on his own is just going to get sued off the planet if they dare to even come near any protected IP. But this is a whole new subject. Let's talk about what the Runcam 5 is about and what else is in the box. Well, apart from some foam packaging, we have a brief set of instructions, and we have this mysterious box inside which is a little USB charge cable, and I expect a data cable, and then two Runcam battery straps, or I should say camera straps, because I'm guessing the intention is to hold the camera in. Let's go through this in a few more details in close-up, but before I want to do that, I wanted to see exactly what size it was. Will it actually replace the GoPro? Most people had the Session 5, only had the original Session, but if we take something like this TPU mount, loads of people are typically using things like this. This is a Coppers 2 I'm using. Your GoPro Session will slide in, nice and tight, end's not going to come out of there. So if we look at the Runcam, what will happen if we try and get this in, and which is the up way, is this way. It's a fit. Yeah, it's pretty solid in there, that's not going to come out. So that's quite exciting, and it's interesting to think that they removed the Runcam 3 and yet the 5 is okay. And all previous box cameras, this is the original Foxhead box, this is the Runcam 3S, and you will see they are a completely different size. They are all sort of oversized compared to the Session, and this is coming out the same, which is quite nice, isn't it? But yeah, let's have a close-up view and we'll see how we work it before we take it out for a fly. So here's a close-up of the camera, and you will note there's not an awful lot to go over because there's a button and that's about it. So down the side there's a USB connector, and you can use this to charge, and if you plug it in you can access the SD card as a mass storage device, so you can transfer that way. The SD card is hidden behind this flap which stops it coming out. There's the SD card there. This is a reset slot, I guess, if the camera locks up. Also, if you do like a triple click on that, you'll format the SD card in there. So this little flap here is about not getting the SD card to eject. It's not waterproof. As you see there, we've got an exposed USB slot, so don't go dunking it. But as far as the operation goes, it's fairly simple. It's long press, turns that on, it beeps, press it again, it starts recording and flashes, press it one more time and it stops, and of course long press turns it off. Now you can actually configure this to auto record when you turn on, and the way you configure it's quite interesting itself. If we just turn it on again, so we are going to use the Runcam app, and if you've ever had any Runcams before, like see I've got the Runcam 3S, the Runcam 2, the Split, you'll know this application, and I'm quite glad that instead of having a separate app for every camera, they use the same one. So instead of this being like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or anything else, what you do, you go into, say, configure the camera, and you do all the bits you want, and it comes up with a QR code, and you just point the camera at it. So one thing is interesting on this one is the resolutions. This does 4K, and you're supposed to have like a U3 SD card for that. A U3 is something that can do 30 megabytes per second or greater, as opposed to a U1 or a class 10, which is like 10 megabytes per second. I'm going to be concentrating on the 1080p stuff. And interestingly, again here, they've got something called 1080p 60 frames per second XV. What this appears to be is 4:3 stretched widescreen. So you've got the vertical resolution stretched out, as opposed to what GoPro does, which in its super view, it dynamically stretches at the ends but keeps the middle in. And you've also got 1440p at 60 frames per second, which is pure 4:3 in case you want to stretch that yourself. But my sort of flying is generally, I fly at 1080p 60, but I'll do some of this 1080p XV stuff. And I also note you've got this distortion correction here, which I thought that might be interesting to look at. Turn it on or off, and then you see you've got the power on auto recording. Anyway, to make that happen, you say apply, and what you get is this QR code, and it gives you this nice little list of instructions. Turn on the camera, double click the shutter button, point at the QR code, and that should be about it. So let's try one of those. So I'm going to double click the button. It's gone blue. Then I'm going to point it at the QR code. We got 2 beeps, which means that's now set, which is a reasonably nifty way to do it, and it is one of the things that keeps the prices down as well. No screen on it, not having any Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, all that stuff means you can get this for like $99. Anyway, that was about it. Let's go and actually strap this to a quad and fly it. Hello, welcome back to the field, which is ever evolving. When I first came here, big grass, then the grass was cut. It's all been collected now. It's actually looking pretty neat, and it's very useful because even less chance of me snagging and much easier to land. So I'm here with the Runcam 5. You see I've got it installed here in the Coppers 2 because it fits in the standard GoPro 5 TPU mount, which is really handy. But I've also bought this Immersion RC Mojo 230 to also try on, and you see I've got the GoPro Session in this one, and I'm going to use the GoPro Session as base footage to fly around, do some stuff, then move over to the Runcam 5, do some different modes on the Runcam 5, see how things compare. Let's get going. So I'm starting off here on the GoPro Session on the Mojo 230. Now I chose 2 quads for 2 reasons. Firstly, I chose the Mojo 230 because it's a very smooth flying quad. It's on a like 317, a Betaflight, I think, and I haven't ever bothered upgrading it because it's like, this flies perfectly how I want it to. Why touch it? One of the useful things it's got as well is it's basically got a foam pad and a strap to secure something like a GoPro that way. And I thought it's quite useful having 2 aspects. So you've got one quad where we'd fix it essentially to a foam pad with a strap, and another quad where I've got a TPU mount to put the camera in. So I tried to do a few sort of stock flights or maneuvers. First one I did was sort of going down the field and sort of back up the field and over the tree there. I tried to do something where I was up high and sort of looking across the horizon, and this is a very sunny day, and I managed to get a little bit of jello on the GoPro Session there. Probably be reduced if I had an ND filter. I'm comfortable that the quad is about as smooth as it goes, but you know, there's still some vibrations there, and there's still some coming through on the GoPro Session, so take that into account. What else did we do? We tried to do a sort of power loop over a tree and mess around with the tree a bit, just not so much as a maneuver, just to see when I'm playing with the throttle, does it affect the sort of motion or anything we're getting on the camera. And there you go, just in case you wanted to know what the microphone actually sounds like on the Runcam 5, it sounds like that. It sounds like a quad noise. So this is my first flight, and this is 1080p 60, nothing else, and my first flights of going up and down the field with it. And I have to say, it feels very, very much like it's like a GoPro Session. there wasn't much difference there. What I picked up on the Runcam 5 is it's a bit more susceptible to jello from vibrations. So I don't know if the GoPro does some in-camera stabilization to get rid of these real subtle little wobbles like that, but it's certainly having a slightly better effect than the Runcam here. The Runcam's doing a lovely job in terms of the color and the motion, and that's all good. The only thing I do notice is that yes, I can certainly pick up some jello there, and it's more noticeable when we go up high and we look across at that very bright horizon. You can sort of see it having a bit of a shimmer there as we go up and fly along. I have to say this was a very difficult video to make, because when I go to my editor and I work on the screen there, my actual editor screen is not full screen, and some of these subtleties you can only see when you really blow it up big. So if you watch everything on a phone, you'll be thinking, well, everything looks absolutely fine to me, but yeah, you get it up on a big screen, you blow it up high, that's what happens. It's also more complicated by the fact that I can see a lot of detail in my sort of native footage here, but of course as soon as it goes onto YouTube, things get compressed. Ground details, especially grass, look particularly bad, so depending on how it may or may look, I might publish some sort of raw footage in a link below. So my next flight on the Runcam 5 was 1080p 60 again, but this time with distortion correction on. Now I have to say, in my last flight I didn't look at it and say, oh, that's really distorted that is. Generally speaking, when we see any distortion in the frame, it's when we can see the horizon far at the end and the horizon is moving up from the center towards the ends. That's when it starts to curl around. But that said, I really couldn't see any. So this, to me, having watched it through a couple of times, I find it really difficult to actually pick up the difference. I suppose that the place to look for it is here if we're going to see it. That is the horizon, and that's the worst place for jello. And as we sort of come out of this, do we get much distortion? I don't know. Let's put them side by side for a second, see what we get. Okay, side by side view, not perfect of course, because I'm only approximating the same sort of flight, but no, I can't see anything. I'm not sure what I'm looking for. If you can see anything, let me know, or if you think you know the right sort of test to do, then let me know about that as well. So the next flight, and still on the Mojo 230 all this time, is using the 1080p 60 XV mode. So what we're using here is the whole of the 4.3 sensor stretched out linearly. So it's the same stretch all the way across the screen. So what we find in here is we've got more vertical resolution and we've stretched it horizontally. Now this can look a little bit like everything's sort of flattened a bit, so the trees look a little bit squashed, as do some of the ground details. But you do get a slightly better impression of speed because it's kind of coming out to the ends a bit faster, if you like. It's stretched out that way. It doesn't look bad, but it's not a sort of true aspect ratio, so it's going to look a little bit curious. And I think that sort of the squashed trees looks a little bit weird, but you know, it's here if you want it. Personally, I'm a lot happier with the regular widescreen, and whether that's cropped or not, I still think it looks better. I have to say that in terms of the GoPro Super View, it is again, it's doing a warp on the screen, but I feel it's kind of what people are used to, and they like it because that's the way it normally looks. And again, because it's dynamically stretching out just at the end, it gives some would say a false impression of more speed than it is. But that's what people like now. That's the problem. So we're sort of facing the same sort of issues with, you know, there's some jello around, but overall I'm pleased with the footage. I would be hard picked in most of these situations, aside from the slight jello aspect, to pick out the difference between the Runcam 5 and the Session, just in terms of video quality there. So next up, we're still in 1080 60 frames per second XV, this time with distortion correction on. I didn't know if this would have more of an effect because we're already stretching out. Are we getting some distortion there? And of course, on the field, I don't know, so I had to come back and watch this. But every time I watch the distortion correction stuff,
I mean, I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm looking for because I don't see it as being a lot of distortion in the first place, or perhaps we're just used to the kind of distortion a GoPro gives us. But I'm really not seeing much difference between them. One thing I did note that in the field, although that whole QR code thing's really quite clever and good, when you've got a little bit of reflection on your phone, it can be quite hard to get the camera to read it. So you've really got to be quite careful about how you get it, distance away from it, try and shade it, get the light quite consistent. So sometimes it took a couple of goes, but it was still fairly simple to change all these modes over. I didn't even have to take it off the quad. I could just point it at the camera and do that. Of course, most people will just get a mode they like and stay with it anyway. And as far as the why aren't you showing us 4K or the 2.7K, literally I'm flying what I'd normally fly. I'd fly with a GoPro. I generally use 1080p 60. I don't even use SuperView on my GoPro Session because it only does it at 30 frames a second, so I prefer this to straight widescreen. So if anybody's desperate to see 4K footage from me, let me know and I'll see if I can make it happen. Otherwise, I'm kind of flying my normal stuff. Okay, so we finally moved over to the Coppice 2. So again, I'm out with the Session, and again just in 1080p 60 and widescreen, just to sort of set the standard for it. And it's very sort of similar story to the Mojo 230 in terms of it's pretty smooth most of the way. Where we poke it into the sun and we got the horizon, we're getting a bit of jello there. Again, we're in potential ND filter territory, might help. But generally, it's a pretty smooth ride, and we're pretty satisfied with it. The horizon bit still seems to be the weirdly shaky one. I guess it's because it's such a small line out there, which is very visible on the horizon. But the rest of it looks good. It's a fun quad to fly. Both these quads are really nice. I have to say that the Vortex I haven't flown for a while, but in terms of like a freestyle quad where it's got that more weight, it is so steady. It's so lovely to fly because you can just be so accurate with it. Whereas the sort of Coppice 2, I say, is much more sort of nimble and speedy in the air. But anyway, that's the sort of benchmark. That's the Session for you there. Now, at this stage of the flying, I found out that, of course, I didn't have enough batteries to do the whole thing again. So I thought, you know what, I'll just fly a couple of batteries on 1080p 60 on the Runcam 5. No distortion correction, no weird XV stuff. I'll just go around and have a bit of a fly. And this was my last battery on the Coppice 2, and I'm just basically having a bit of a mess around, having a bit of fun there after doing all those batteries flying exactly the same route, which, let me tell you, after the sort of third or fourth time you've done exactly the same little roll over the tree and then a sort of inverted yaw spin over the field, it becomes just a bit boring to do again and again and again. So I was happy to do anything that was a little bit different. And it's much the same story. It's almost the Session, I would say, or it's almost my Session more accurately. I don't know what a Session 5 is like in comparison. Again, the only thing I'm picking up that the Runcam 5 does worse than the Session is it's more prone to this jello effect. And whether that's because the GoPro's got some sort of internal processing which helps out on trying to get those real high frequency vibrations and get rid of them, or it handles the sunlight better and does its frame rate differently, I don't know. But the resulting footage is the Session looks nicer to me. The Runcam is close behind if you could do something about the jello. Now, I keep talking about ND filters. Some people have quite rightly said it's a bit of a fudge because what you're doing is slowing down the shutter speed and it's kind of blurring the jello out. That said, it works for plenty of people, so that might be the right thing to do. But I got to say, it's still a pretty impressive camera for what you get for this very low price, especially in comparison to GoPro, and especially considering you can't buy GoPro Sessions anymore.
Well, I was fairly impressed with this. I have to say, it doesn't come in quite as good as the GoPro, just in terms of that little high frequency oscillations. The actual picture quality and the bitrate it's coming in, it looks pretty good to me. Hopefully it's going to look good on YouTube after YouTube mashed it to death. But again, I don't kind of film it and sort of try and compress it ready for YouTube, because I want to know what it's going to be like just by doing nothing. So it's like Final Cut Pro chucks out a MP4 file and GoPro does stuff to it, and we see what happens at the end with the session and the Runcam 5 stuff. But I guess, you know, the biggest thing about it is the fact it is the same dimensions as the session, but it costs $99, $99.99. So under $100 for a fairly decent camera can't be bad, especially if you're going to insist on smashing them into concrete floors and stuff like that, which I haven't done yet. I have broken one session on a weird thing, but so obviously some cost-cutting measures were made here to keep that on that price. So they're not saying here is an action camera, here is a bunch of mounts you can attach to it and use it on mountain bikes and that. They're not waterproofing it. It's single button, no screen, USB port there, SD card port there, and that is it, and just an app to use QR codes with. And for what it does, I'm quite happy with that, because what you don't need in FPV is a lot of stuff causing extra price in that, which when you don't want it, you know, Wi-Fi can be useful, but it's not a necessity. So this is coming up quite nicely there. Anyway, see what you think of the footage that I've put there already, and then you can decide if it's something you think is worthy. So this, of course, has been the Runcam 5, and it was kindly supplied for review by Banggood, so thanks to Banggood. And there'll be links down below where you can find more details about it. I hope you found that review helpful, and any questions, comments, etc., don't forget to put them down below. I will catch you in the next video, so goodbye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.